A charity run. That's how it all began. It was a sunny Saturday morning, the kind that promises warmth and energy. My wife Laura had convinced me to participate in a local charity run. I wasn't much of a runner, but for the sake of the cause, and to make her happy, I agreed. Laura's mother, Sandra, also decided to join us. Sandra was a vibrant woman in her mid-50s with a charm that belied her age. She had always been a strong presence in Laura's life, and by extension, in mine. Sandra and I got along well. She was easy to talk to with a sharp wit and a disarming smile. I never saw her as anything more than my mother-in-law, a respected elder until that day. The charity run started off normally enough with the three of us jogging together, laughing and chatting. But as the miles wore on, Laura fell behind, struggling with a sudden cramp. "Go on ahead," she urged, wincing in pain. "I'll catch up." Sandra and I exchanged a glance, and without much thought, we continued running. We matched each other's pace, our breathing synchronized. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became more intense. Sandra's cheeks were flushed, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. There was something captivating about her determination, her resilience. As we reached the final stretch of the run, we slowed down, eventually stopping to catch our breath. We were both drenched in sweat, our clothes clinging to our bodies. Sandra laughed, a sound that was both joyous and breathless. "You did great," she said, her hand resting on my arm. Her touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt through me. "Thanks," I replied, trying to ignore the strange feeling that her touch had sparked. "You too. You're really something." We waited for Laura, who arrived a few minutes later, looking tired but happy. She hugged us both, thanking us for sticking together. I felt a pang of guilt for the fleeting thoughts I had, but I quickly brushed them aside. Sandra was my mother-in-law after all. There was nothing more to it. In the days that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm. Laura and I were busy with work and other commitments, and I didn't see much of Sandra. But the memory of that day lingered. I found myself thinking about her more often than I cared to admit. There was an undeniable allure in her confidence, her poise. One evening, about a week after the charity run, Laura received a call from her mother. Sandra had injured her ankle while gardening and needed some help around the house. Laura, swamped with work, asked if I could go over and lend a hand. I agreed, wanting to be helpful and also curious to see Sandra again. When I arrived at Sandra's house, she greeted me with a warm smile, though she was clearly in pain. Her ankle was swollen and she was hobbling around, trying to maintain her usual independence. "Thank you for coming," she said, leaning on the doorframe for support. "Of course, Sandra, you should be resting," I replied, gently guiding her to the couch. "What do you need help with?" We spent the next few hours tidying up her garden, preparing meals, and making sure she was comfortable. Throughout it all, there was an easy camaraderie between us. We talked about everything and nothing, our conversations flowing effortlessly. The more time I spent with her, the more I found myself drawn to her. As the evening wore on, Sandra's ankle began to bother her more. She winced with each step, and I insisted she rest while I finished up. After everything was done, I sat down beside her on the couch, handing her a glass of water. "Thank you, really," she said, her eyes softening as she looked at me. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." "It's nothing," I replied, feeling a strange mix of pride and something else I couldn't quite identify. "I'm just glad I could be here for you." Sandra's gaze lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary. There was an intensity in her eyes that made my heart race. She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing my hand. The touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine. "I appreciate it more than you know," she said softly. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. "It's no problem at all, Sandra." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the air thick with unspoken words. The tension was palpable, a current that hummed just beneath the surface. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't bring myself to move. There was something intoxicating about being close to her, something that made it impossible to walk away. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "You should probably get going. Laura will be wondering where you are." "Yeah, I suppose you're right," I replied, reluctantly standing up. "Take care of yourself, okay? And call me if you need anything." "I will," she said, her eyes following me as I headed toward the door. "Thank you again." As I walked to my car, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I couldn't deny the attraction I felt for Sandra, but I also knew it was wrong. She was my mother-in-law, and I was married to her daughter. Yet the memory of her touch, her gaze, lingered, making it hard to think clearly. That night, as I lay in bed beside Laura, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The boundaries that had once seemed so clear were now blurred, and I was left grappling with a desire that I knew could lead to nothing but trouble. The following days were a blur of routine and restlessness. I found myself distracted at work, my mind drifting back to Sandra. Every detail of that evening at her house replayed in my mind, the touch of her hand, the intensity of her gaze. I knew I was treading dangerous waters, but the pull was too strong to ignore. A week later, Laura mentioned that her mother's ankle was still bothering her and that she could use some more help around the house. My heart leaped at the chance to see Sandra again, though I tried to mask my eagerness. "I'll go over and check on her," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "It's no trouble," Laura smiled, grateful. "Thanks, honey. You're the best." When I arrived at Sandra's house, she greeted me with that same warm smile, though there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something I recognized because I felt it too. "Hello again," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I hope I'm not causing too much trouble." "Not at all," I replied, shutting the door behind me. "I'm happy to help." We fell into a comfortable rhythm, much like before. I took care of the tasks she couldn't manage, while we talked and laughed, the hours slipping by unnoticed. But this time, there was an undercurrent of tension, a silent acknowledgement of the growing attraction between us. As the evening approached, I found myself reluctant to leave. We sat in her living room, the dim light casting a soft glow around us. Sandra leaned back, her eyes closed, a contented smile playing on her lips. "You really don't have to stay so late," she said, though there was no urgency in her voice. "I don't mind," I replied, my voice low. "I enjoy your company." She opened her eyes, her gaze locking onto mine. "I enjoy yours too." The air between us seemed to thicken, the silence charged with unspoken desire. I shifted closer, unable to resist the pull any longer. My hand brushed against hers, and she didn't pull away. "Sandra," I began, my voice barely more than a whisper, "there's something I need to say." She looked at me, her eyes soft and inviting. "Go on." "I can't stop thinking about you," I confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Ever since that day at the charity run, I know it's wrong, but I can't help it." Sandra's expression softened, a mixture of understanding and longing. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted, her voice equally hushed. "But we have to be careful." "I know," I said, inching closer. "But right now, all I can think about is you." Before I could second-guess myself, I leaned in, my lips meeting hers in a tentative kiss. It was soft at first, a gentle exploration, but quickly grew more passionate. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. In that moment, all thoughts of right and wrong faded away. All that mattered was the feel of her lips against mine, the warmth of her body pressed close. We were lost in each other, the world outside forgotten. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting together. "What are we doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, my own breath shaky, "but it feels too good to stop." Sandra nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of desire and uncertainty. "We can't let anyone find out." "Of course not," I agreed, my hand cupping her cheek. "This stays between us." She leaned into my touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I never thought this would happen," she murmured. "But now that it has, I can't bring myself to regret it." "Neither can I said, my thumb brushing over her lips. "But we have to be careful." Sandra nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Yes, we do." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our decision settling over us. There was no going back now, no undoing what had been done. We had crossed a line, and our lives would never be the same. As the night grew darker, I knew I had to leave. Standing up, I helped Sandra to her feet, our hands lingering in a silent promise. "I'll see you soon," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes," she replied, her eyes holding mine. Soon. Driving home, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I was exhilarated and terrified, filled with anticipation and dread. What we were doing was wrong, but the connection I felt with Sandra was undeniable. When I walked through the door, Laura was waiting for me, a smile on her face. "How's Mom?" she asked, her eyes bright with concern. "She's doing better," I replied, forcing a smile. "We had a good talk." Laura hugged me, her trust like a dagger in my heart. "Thank you for being there for her." I held her close, the weight of my secret pressing down on me. "Always," I said softly, my mind already drifting back to Sandra and the promise of what was to come. The days that followed were a haze of normalcy tainted by the thrill of secrecy. I went about my daily routine, but my thoughts constantly drifted to Sandra. Each moment spent with Laura felt tinged with guilt, yet the memory of Sandra's touch, her kiss, lingered, intoxicating and irresistible. Sandra and I began to communicate through coded messages and stolen glances. We couldn't risk being caught, so we found ways to convey our feelings without words. A fleeting touch, a lingering look, these became our language, a silent conversation that spoke volumes. One afternoon, Laura mentioned that her mother needed more help around the house, especially with some heavier tasks. My heart quickened at the prospect of seeing Sandra again. I volunteered immediately, eager for another chance to be alone with her. When I arrived at Sandra's house, she greeted me with that same warm smile, though her eyes held a new intensity. "I'm glad you could come," she said, her voice low and inviting. "Of course," I replied, stepping inside. "Anything you need." We worked together in comfortable silence, our movements synchronized. The air was charged with unspoken tension, a palpable electricity that seemed to hum between us. Every brush of our hands, every accidental touch, sent shivers down my spine. As we finished up for the day, Sandra suggested we take a break. "Let's sit for a bit," she said, leading me to the living room. We settled on the couch, the space between us crackling with anticipation. "I've missed you," she said softly, her eyes locking onto mine. "I've missed you too," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "Every moment apart feels like an eternity." Sandra reached out, her fingers brushing my cheek. "We have to be so careful," she whispered, her touch sending waves of desire through me. "I know," I replied, leaning into her touch, "but being with you feels too good to resist." Our lips met in a fierce kiss, all the pent-up longing pouring out in that single moment. Her hands roamed over my body, each touch igniting a fire that burned hotter with each passing second. I pulled her closer, our bodies pressed together in a desperate embrace. "Sandra," I breathed, my lips trailing down her neck. "I can't get enough of you." "I feel the same," she murmured, her breath hitching as my hands explored her curves. "But we have to be quick. Laura could call any minute." Her words brought a jolt of reality, but it did nothing to dampen my desire. If anything, it heightened the urgency, the need to make the most of our stolen moments. We moved together with a frantic intensity, our kisses growing more heated, our touches more demanding. As our passion peaked, the world around us seemed to fade away. There was only Sandra and me, lost in a whirlwind of desire and need. It was intoxicating, the forbidden nature of our relationship adding a dangerous edge that made every touch, every kiss more thrilling. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our bodies trembling with the aftershocks of our stolen passion. "We can't keep doing this," Sandra said, her voice trembling. "It's too risky." "I know," I replied, my heart pounding, "but I can't stay away from you." "Neither can I," she admitted, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and fear. "But we have to find a way to be more careful." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. There was no easy solution, no way to be together without risking everything. But the thought of ending it, of never feeling her touch again, was unbearable. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice firm with determination. "We have to." Sandra nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I hope so," she whispered, "because I don't want to lose you." We held each other for a while longer, the reality of our situation sinking in. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions. We were caught in a web of desire and deception, and there was no way out without causing pain and heartbreak. As I drove home that evening, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of being with Sandra was tempered by the fear of being caught, the guilt of betraying Laura. But despite the risks, I couldn't bring myself to end it. The connection I felt with Sandra was too strong, too deep to ignore. When I walked through the door, Laura greeted me with a kiss, her trust and love like a heavy weight on my conscience. "How's Mom?" she asked, her eyes bright with concern. "She's doing better," I replied, forcing a smile. "We got a lot done today." Laura hugged me, her warmth and affection a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. "Thank you for taking care of her," she said softly. "You're amazing." I held her close, my heart aching with guilt. "Anything for you," I whispered, my mind already drifting back to Sandra and the forbidden desire that threatened to consume us both. The days turned into weeks, and our secret affair with Sandra grew more intense, more consuming. We found excuses to see each other, creating opportunities for stolen moments of passion. The thrill of the forbidden, only heightened our desire, and each encounter left us both yearning for more. One particularly hot summer evening, Laura suggested we have a family barbecue at Sandra's house. It was a perfect opportunity to be together, but it also meant navigating the treacherous waters of secrecy with Laura present. My heart pounded at the thought of being so close to Sandra while maintaining the facade of normalcy. We arrived at Sandra's house in the late afternoon. The sun was still high, casting long shadows across the yard. Laura was busy setting up the grill, and I found myself stealing glances at Sandra, who looked stunning in a simple summer dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. Our eyes met across the yard, and I felt a jolt of electricity pass between us. She gave me a small, secretive smile, a silent acknowledgement of our shared desire. It took all my willpower to keep my composure and focus on helping Laura with the preparations. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere grew more relaxed. Laura and Sandra chatted animatedly, their laughter mingling with the sizzle of the grill and the hum of the cicadas. I found myself constantly aware of Sandra's presence, the way her eyes would occasionally flicker to mine, the subtle brush of her hand against mine as we passed each other. After dinner, as the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Laura suggested we all go inside for dessert. She went into the kitchen to prepare, leaving Sandra and me alone on the patio. The air was thick with tension, the weight of our secret pressing down on us. "I can't stop thinking about you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sandra stepped closer, her eyes filled with longing. "Neither can I," she murmured. "Every moment we're apart feels like an eternity." We stood there, the night enveloping us in its embrace, the silence speaking volumes. The risk of being caught was high, but the desire between us was undeniable, irresistible. Before I could second-guess myself, I took Sandra's hand and led her around the side of the house, away from Laura's prying eyes. We found ourselves in a secluded corner of the garden, hidden from view. The darkness provided a cloak of anonymity, allowing us to be together without fear of discovery. Our lips met in a fierce, hungry kiss, all the pent-up longing pouring out in that single moment. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer as our bodies pressed together in a desperate embrace. The world around us faded away, leaving only the two of us, lost in a whirlwind of passion. "Sandra," I breathed, my lips trailing down her neck. "I can't get enough of you." "I feel the same," she whispered, her breath hitching as my hands roamed over her body. "But we have to be quick. Laura could come looking for us." Her words brought a jolt of reality, but it did nothing to dampen my desire. If anything, it heightened the urgency, the need to make the most of our stolen moments. We moved together with a frantic intensity, our kisses growing more heated, our touches more demanding. As our passion reached its peak, the world around us seemed to blur, leaving only the two of us entwined in a dance of desire. It was intoxicating, the forbidden nature of our relationship adding a dangerous edge that made every touch, every kiss, more thrilling. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our bodies trembling with the aftershocks of our stolen passion. "We can't keep doing this," Sandra said, her voice trembling. "It's too risky." "I know," I replied, my heart pounding, "but I can't stay away from you." "Neither can I," she admitted, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and fear. "But we have to find a way to be more careful." We stood there for a few moments, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. There was no easy solution, no way to be together without risking everything. But the thought of ending it, of never feeling her touch again, was unbearable. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice firm with determination. "We have to." Sandra nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I hope so," she whispered, "because I don't want to lose you." We shared one last, lingering kiss before reluctantly making our way back to the patio. Laura was just coming out of the kitchen carrying a tray of desserts. She smiled when she saw us, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Here we go," she said cheerfully, setting the tray down on the table. "I made your favorite, Mom." Sandra smiled, though her eyes flickered to mine for a brief moment, a silent reminder of our secret. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady. We sat together, eating dessert and chatting as if everything was normal. But beneath the surface, the tension simmered, a constant reminder of the forbidden desire that bound Sandra and me together. Each stolen glance, each brush of our hands, only fueled the fire that threatened to consume us both. As the evening drew to a close and Laura and I prepared to leave, Sandra pulled me aside for a brief private moment. "Be careful," she whispered, her eyes searching mine. "We can't let this destroy everything." "I know," I replied, my heart aching with the weight of our secret. "But I can't let you go." Sandra nodded, her expression a mix of determination and sorrow. "Neither can I," she said softly. "We'll find a way." As we drove home, Laura chatted about the evening, completely unaware of the turmoil inside me. I forced myself to respond, to act normal, but my mind was already drifting back to Sandra, to the promise of our next stolen moment together. The path we had chosen was fraught with danger and deceit, but the pull of our forbidden desire was too strong to resist. And so, we continued our clandestine affair, each stolen moment more precious, more thrilling, and more dangerous than the last. As our secret affair continued, the risk of being caught hung over us like a dark cloud. Sandra and I became more adept at hiding our illicit encounters, but the strain was beginning to show. The thrill of our stolen moments was tainted by the constant fear of discovery, and the guilt I felt towards Laura weighed heavily on my conscience. One evening, about a month after the barbecue, Laura and I were invited to a dinner party at Sandra's house. It was a small gathering, just close family and friends. I knew it would be difficult to maintain the facade, but I couldn't decline without raising suspicion. As we arrived, Sandra greeted us warmly, her eyes lingering on mine for just a moment longer than necessary. The tension between us was palpable, and I struggled to keep my emotions in check. Throughout the evening, we exchanged fleeting glances, each one charged with unspoken desire. The dinner was a success, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. But as the night wore on, I found it increasingly difficult to focus on the conversation. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Sandra and the memory of our passionate encounters. After dessert, the guests began to disperse, leaving just a few of us lingering in the living room. Laura and her friends were engrossed in a lively discussion, and I seized the opportunity to slip away, making my way to the kitchen where Sandra was cleaning up. "Sandra," I whispered, my voice low and urgent, "we need to talk." She turned to face me, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and fear. "Not here," she murmured, glancing over her shoulder to ensure we were alone. "Come with me." She led me to a small, dimly lit room at the back of the house, closing the door behind us. The air was thick with tension, and my heart pounded in my chest. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. "We can't keep doing this," Sandra said finally, her voice trembling. "It's tearing me apart." "I know," I replied, my own voice barely more than a whisper, "but I can't stay away from you." She took a step closer, her eyes searching mine. "I feel the same, but it's getting too dangerous. Laura is starting to suspect something. We have to end this before it's too late." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I struggled to process the reality of the situation. Ending our affair was the logical choice, but the thought of losing Sandra was unbearable. "Is this really what you want?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to touch my cheek. "No, it's not what I want, but it's what we have to do, for Laura's sake and for ours." I took her hand in mine, holding it tightly. "I don't know if I can do this." "We have to," she said softly, her voice filled with determination. "We can't let this destroy everything." I nodded, knowing deep down that she was right. The risks were too great, and the consequences of being discovered were too severe, but the pain of letting her go was almost too much to bear. "We'll always have our memories," Sandra said, her voice trembling, "and maybe, in another life, things could have been different." Tears filled my eyes as I leaned in to kiss her one last time, a bittersweet farewell to the passion that had consumed us both. The kiss was tender and filled with longing, a final act of defiance against the cruel reality that demanded we part ways. When we finally pulled apart, we were both crying, our hearts breaking under the weight of our decision. "I love you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I love you too," she replied, her tears flowing freely. "But we have to let each other go." With a heavy heart, I left the room, the weight of our decision pressing down on me like a leaden shroud. I rejoined the others, forcing a smile as I pretended that everything was normal. But inside, I was shattered, the pain of losing Sandra a constant ache that gnawed at my soul. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the overwhelming grief. Laura noticed the change in me, her concern growing with each passing day. "Are you okay?" she asked one evening, her eyes filled with worry. I'm fine, I replied, forcing a smile. Just a bit stressed with work. She nodded, accepting my explanation, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The distance between us grew, the weight of my secret driving a wedge that I feared might never be removed. As time went on, the pain of losing Sandra began to dull, though it never fully disappeared. Our affair had been a whirlwind of passion and danger, a fleeting moment of stolen happiness that left us both scarred. I often found myself thinking of her, wondering what might have been if things had been different. But I knew that our decision had been the right one, even if it had come at a great cost. In the end, we had chosen to protect the people we loved, even if it meant sacrificing our own happiness. And though the pain of letting her go was almost too much to bear, I knew that it was a burden I would carry for the rest of my life. The weeks that followed our painful decision to end the affair were some of the hardest of my life. The weight of the secret I carried felt like a heavy stone in my chest, making it difficult to breathe, to think, to function normally. Laura sensed my withdrawal and tried her best to bridge the gap, but the guilt and sorrow I felt made it almost impossible to reciprocate. I threw myself into work, hoping that the constant grind would numb the pain, but it only served as a temporary distraction. My thoughts would inevitably drift back to Sandra, to our stolen moments of passion and the deep connection we had shared. I missed her more than I could bear, and the longing for her was a constant ache that refused to fade. Laura, ever perceptive, grew more concerned. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, she gently broached the subject. "Is there something you're not telling me?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "You've been so distant lately." I swallowed hard, the lie forming on my lips before I could stop it. "It's just work," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been really stressful." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She reached out and took my hand, her touch a stark reminder of the trust I was betraying. "I'm here for you," she said softly. "Whatever it is, we can get through it together." Her words were like a knife to my heart, and I had to fight to keep my emotions in check. I wanted to tell her everything, to confess and unburden myself, but I knew that doing so would only cause more pain. So I nodded, squeezing her hand in silent gratitude, even as the guilt continued to eat away at me. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the raw edges of my grief began to smooth over. I found solace in small things, a beautiful sunset, the laughter of friends, the simple pleasure of a good book. Life went on, and though the pain of losing Sandra never fully disappeared, it became a part of me, a scar that reminded me of what I had lost. Sandra and I saw each other occasionally at family gatherings, but we kept our distance, maintaining the facade of normalcy for the sake of those we loved. Each encounter was bittersweet, filled with unspoken words and lingering glances, but we both knew that it was for the best. One evening, several months after our affair had ended, Sandra and I found ourselves alone on the back porch during a family barbecue. The night was warm and the stars glittered overhead, casting a soft glow on the world below. "It's been a while," she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine. "It has," I replied, my heart aching with the familiar longing. "How have you been?" she sighed, a sad smile playing on her lips. "I've been okay. It's been hard, but I'm managing." I nodded, understanding all too well. "Same here, I miss you." "I miss you too," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But we've made the right choice, haven't we?" "We have," I said, though the words felt like ashes in my mouth. It was the only choice we could make. We stood in silence for a while, the night enveloping us in its embrace. Despite the pain, there was a sense of peace in knowing that we had done the right thing, even if it had come at a great cost. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself standing by the door, saying goodbye to Sandra. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "Take care of yourself," she said softly, her hand lingering on mine for just a moment longer than necessary. "You too," I replied, my heart heavy with the weight of our unspoken farewell. Driving home, I realized that while the pain of losing Sandra would never fully disappear, it had become a part of me, a reminder of a love that could never be. I had made peace with my choices, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew that I had the strength to face it. Back at home, Laura greeted me with a smile, her love and support a constant source of comfort. I hugged her tightly, feeling a renewed sense of gratitude for the life we shared. In the end, life is a series of choices, each one shaping the path we walk. While my affair with Sandra had been a painful detour, it had also taught me valuable lessons about love, loyalty, and the consequences of our actions. Though I would always carry the memory of our time together, I had found a way to move forward, to cherish the love I had with Laura, and to strive for a future free of secrets and deceit. As I lay in bed that night, holding Laura close, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but I knew that as long as I faced them with honesty and integrity, I could find a way to heal and to build a life worth living. The affair with Sandra was a chapter that had come to an end, a bittersweet memory that would forever be a part of me. But it was also a reminder of the importance of making the right choices, even when they are the hardest ones to make. And with that knowledge, I was ready to face the future, one day at a time, with the hope of a brighter tomorrow.